Hi, I'm Dr. Tracy Shroyer, a career positioning strategist, professor, and someone who spent a lot of time thinking about what it really means to grow in a world that just won't stop changing. Welcome to the Technically Human podcast. This podcast is about navigating your career, your identity, and your next chapter in a world that's shaped by AI, technology, and constant change. Here, we're going to talk about real stuff. We're going to talk about career pivots, uncertainty, reinvention, and mostly how to stay grounded in who you are while everything around you evolves. Are you ready to go? Let's dive in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this next episode of the Technically Human podcast. So, in this episode, I want to share with you some insight into something that I did based on hearing it in a couple different podcasts. And most recently, one of the podcasts that I listened to was The Big Deal with Cody Sanchez. If you're not listening and subscribing to that podcast, I highly recommend it. The episode that I listened to was with Jeff Woods, and his name is spelled Geoff Woods. And the episode on YouTube is titled How to Use AI to Make Money, Grow Your Business, and Be More Productive. And I'll link that within the description as well. And in this episode, Jeff talks about using AI to create your own board of directors or advisory board of different people. And I thought to myself, after hearing it on something else and then also on this and hearing him talk more and more about how he's used it and used it in a company and how they set up these different personas and different things like that. I thought, oh my gosh, why am I not doing this? I can't afford to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to get insight and coaching from these individuals. And I do understand the challenges or potential issues with AI. I'm not foolish to think that everything is going to be rainbows and unicorns with using these individuals in a board of directors or advisory board within AI. So, what I decided to do was set up my own for my business and for a little bit of my life. The one thing I'm not including in here, I'm going to set up a separate board for my teaching, being a professor specifically. But I want to walk you through what are some of the prompts, what are some of the questions I asked, and what are some of the things that I thought of as I was setting up this advisory board. Before you even create any kind of advisory board, I really encourage you to sit down and think about and brainstorm what is your vision and your mission, whether you're an entrepreneur or this is for your personal life or for your work life, whatever it is, what's your vision? What's your mission? And think about what are those big goals that you have, and they can be very high level, and start there. And how are you foreseeing that this advisory board is going to support you in building out the strategy to get there? Because once you have the vision, the mission, and then the high level, what are these things that I want to pie in the sky, what I like to do? And maybe you don't have it formulated into a specific goal format yet. How is that advisory board going to question you and to get down to the nitty gritty? And then also to help you formulate what are those strategic goals? How do you break those down to be a little bit more tactical? What's the priority? What do you work on? How do you make sure you're more effective, more efficient? All of those types of things. So I leveraged ChatGPT to set this up. One of the things that I want to do is set up a prompt from Chat to plug into Claude. My concern with Claude right now, and I know a ton of people are using Claude and recommend Claude highly, is that I am running out of credits or space. And I've even paid before to have the lowest level, and I continue to run out. And so I want to make sure what I've been doing in the last week is whenever I use Claude is I'm more intentional about how I'm using it versus in chat, I might just use it to plug in different things, ask questions, give scenarios, things like that. I'm being much more intentional of the prompts that I'm putting into Claude to make sure that I'm using those credits much more wisely. So I want to share with you how I've built this out so far in ChatGPT, some of the things to think about as you're building this. I knew of a couple people who I wanted to be on my board initially, and so I put that in to get advice if I keep those people in. I also was trying to make sure I don't have way too many people on the board, because what happens there is that the more people you have, the more different inputs, feedback, challenges, different things like that you might have come back. So you want to make sure that it's a great source to bounce ideas across, not necessarily always taking those 100% as is, but thinking through the responses that they give you. And several of the people on the board, when I bounce some questions off already, which I'll share with you as I go along, have challenged me. Did you think about this? Did you think about it from this perspective? And I want to call out Adam Grant specifically. And I can, as I listen to Brene Brown and Adam Grant on their new podcast, The Curiosity Shop, and I highly recommend that. I love Brene. I love Adam, both individually, together. They're amazing. I love their banter back and forth too. But Adam's like, did you think about it from this perspective? And I'm like, damn it, Adam. And I'll have to think through it and go through it from there. So let me share with you a little bit. I put together some notes. I also have my chat in front of me. I'm not going to share that because I made quite a few changes as I went along. And of course, as you build your own, you're not going to build it exactly like I built mine. So what I recommend that you do is if you're listening this and you're thinking about creating your own board, take some notes, put some notes down of things to think about and be able to play around with in whatever AI tool that you're using and build it how you want to build it and ask the questions that you want to ask because it's not going to be exactly the same. You're not going to ask for the same types of categories or the same types of individuals. You may have some people that you're already thinking about. And the other thing that I did not think about, which I don't know that I would have anybody off the top of my head think about, is if you asked for chat to think about what would someone bring somebody into my board of directors who is no longer alive and what you would probably have to do if they're not like a celebrity or somebody that's well known is you would probably have to create that persona and give much more of a profile as to who that person is and how they might think so that the AI can really start to embody that profile and be able to give you perspectives from that. So it may be a little bit more challenging from that, but that's something I didn't think about before. And one thing I think about specifically for that is if somebody is thinking about from a spiritual perspective or religious perspective and they wanted to put in Jesus or some individual from the Bible or from history or something like that, then they may want to ask the question of chat, what do you know about this person? So they can tell you and spill it out already. Like if you're naming a specific person in the Bible or in history or whatnot, and then you can make sure that you fill in what your thoughts are. And I would make sure too that you're not like if you're doing something like that, it's not always the rainbows and unicorns for that person. It's, hey, I also want you to challenge me, play the devil's advocate for some of these things too. Don't always give it the bright, shiny bow of approval when you go through. One of the reasons I decided to build my AI board of advisors is because when I'm thinking about as I grow my business and the directions that I want to go, I want to make sure that I'm thinking about it appropriately and I'm not missing steps and that I'm able to make sure I can be as efficient and as effective as possible. And I feel that this board of directors can provide that guidance that I otherwise would not get. And one of the things that I've been leveraging AI for more recently, and I've listened to a lot of podcast episodes that talk about this, is having AI, and Jeff mentions this in the Cody Sanchez's podcast, is having it question you, having it turn the tables and interview you because we don't want to use AI tools as Google, how we might search in Google. We want to be more strategic and have more of a thought process in it. And I do like also what Jeff Wood says about AI is your thought partner and you are, I can't remember the term he used, the thinker, the main thing. It's about something. I can't remember off the top of my head but that you are that person who has having that thought and they're your partner and you're bouncing ideas off of them for that. So I wanted to make sure I stopped asking random questions, that I'm very targeted in what I'm asking, that I'm getting feedback from the perspectives of all of these individuals that I have on my board. A lot of organizations I'm seeing, and I even listened to who is it, Holly Marie Haynes, Crush the Rush podcast, and she talked with an individual about using AI agents, and those are part of your team, and your team interacts with them as well. So I've started to stray into that area, but I want to play with this board of directors first, because before you start building the tactical pieces of what happens and who does what, you definitely need the strategy. And that's why I was looking at this board of directors is going to help me to build out more of that strategy. And the other thing too, and Jeff mentioned this in the Big Deal podcast, is you want to get insight into what are those non-obvious things that you're just not thinking about, and bringing those to the forefront. And if you can't answer a question, what are some of the questions, or what are some of the answers that you might consider? And then you could continue to go off of those. Okay, so I wanted to make sure that I had multiple perspectives, and it wasn't because I couldn't make decisions, because I wanted to make better decisions. So I didn't want to use AI as an assistant so much as I wanted this advisory board. And so instead of saying something like, write me a marketing plan, I would say, what would my advisory board debate before approving this? And one of the things that Jeff Woods brings up, the example in the Big Deal podcast, is putting together a deck to put in front of a board and putting that into Claude. And he had already built out the personas, the personality profiles for each of the board members and the actual live board members in this scenario. And so he was able to put in the slide deck and say, what are some of the top questions, or what are the top three issues or challenges, or what are they going to say when they look at this? And it gave back very specific, like on this slide, this person is going to, it's better to show it this way because it's going to be much more clear, and things like that. Or this person's going to get stuck on this forever, those types of things. So making sure that you're clear in how you're introducing things. So I did not choose people for my board because they're famous. The people that I had already identified for my board, I have been listening to for quite some time, probably a year minimum, if not more. I chose them because of the way that they think, and that I like that, and that they dig in and they look at it from a different perspective and they ask different questions. When I went into ChatGPT to start to build this, I basically said, if I had a board of directors for myself and my business, I want to include, I started out saying I wanted Amy Porterfield from a marketing perspective, Holly Marie Haynes from the Crush the Rush podcast for AI support, thinking about the bots or the agents, Life First Business. She also talks about a lot with her guests. Lewis Howes from a greatness perspective. And I said, who else would you recommend that I add? And it comes back and it says, basically, I'm glad you're not really choosing these because they're celebrities. You're thinking about the way that they're thinking, which I mentioned. So it talks about each of those individuals and what they bring to the table and what they talk about. So like Amy Porterfield, she talks about digital products, email strategy, evergreen funnels, customer journey. Overarching is marketing and audience growth. Chat talks about these are a strong start. It also says I would add these people. And I believe it adds these people because it's going back through some of my other chats when I've asked questions about these individuals. So the first one was Adam Grant, and the overarching was organizational psychology and ideas, which makes sense. It says he's an organizational psychologist who has successfully translated research into books, podcast speaking, and consulting without losing credibility. It says you already have the research background. I'd study how he packages ideas for a broad audience. And it says his seat would be like his main question he helps to answer, is this idea backed by evidence and communicated so people actually care? It also mentioned Brene Brown because of the courage and human connection aspect. And listening on this podcast, technically human, that totally makes sense. It also gives a little bit more. It says her question would be, where are you protecting yourself instead of telling people the story that they need to hear? So thinking about that vulnerability aspect. The next one, I had not heard of this individual before, Rory Vaden. I've since added him on my socials, started to listen to him. He talks about intellectual property. And this says this is the person I'd add if your goal is to become known for original frameworks. He teaches people to identify what they uniquely know, to package it, and build a business around that IP. And it says that's directly relevant to your 4C framework, career psychology work, and your future books and workshops. So I thought that was great, and I wanted to get more insight into him. Another one is Simon Sinek, who talks about movement building, and you may know of Simon Sinek of Start With Why. And he is great to ask, is this a movement or just another product? So I like that. Alex Hormozy, this is somebody who I heard about, and I think this was on the Big Deal podcast. Maybe one other one. Alex Hormozy looks at business economics. I've started to watch his video reels on TikTok and absolutely love them. This isn't for branding, it's for discipline. So it says whenever you have 10 ideas, you'd probably ask which one creates the most value with the fewest moving parts. It says, I don't think you'd build a business exactly like his, but his operational thinking can help keep you from spreading yourself too thin. The next one, I had not heard of this individual either, Tiago Forte, about knowledge management. It says you generate an enormous amount of intellectual content. A lot of your future value may come from capturing and reusing your thinking. And he would help to answer, how do we turn today's podcast, coaching session, and research into next year's book, course, and keynote? So being able to think of that future, how do we put that out there? And then I really like this, and I remember Jeff Woods talking about this too. Future Tracy. So 10 years from now, Future Tracy is one seat on the board. Would Future Tracy be glad you spent 6 months building this? Or is this just interesting, or is it building the company that I actually want? So it then proceeds to give me, here's my dream board. If you had to pick 8 people, here's the people I would pick, and here are the seats or the categories that they would fall under. And it says they're all known for creating ideas that changed how people think. And I think that's the clue. And that's goes back to my core of what I'm looking for and what I'm doing with my business. And I said, yes, Adam Grant, Brene Brown, Simon Sinek, let's actually add all of these people that you recommend. And it says I would, and it says here's how I would structure it. So the chair of the board, they put future Tracy in, marketing and branding, they put Amy Porterfield, AI and operations is Holly Murray Haynes, vision is Lewis Howes, research and evidence, they put Adam Grant, humanity, Brene Brown, purpose and movement, Simon Sinek, IP is Rory Baden, business and profitability, they put Alex Hormozy, knowledge and content, Tiago Forte, and it says, I'll add 2 more. Executive presence, Dory Clark, who would answer, how do we make sure people think of Tracy first when they think about work, leadership, and AI? And design and user experience, Don Norman, one of the pioneers of human-centered design. And the question is this intuitive for the person using it or only the person who created it? Which I love that perspective. And it says, here's the board I think you'd have in 10 years. And it gives me what that looks like. And so I said, for the first meeting of this board, what should we discuss? And what questions do I need to answer before I start to work? And so this says, if you're facilitating this board meeting, I treat it like a Fortune 5 strategic planning session and not a brainstorming session. The purpose of the first meeting is not what to build, it's who your company exists to become. And so the first theme talks about what business are we actually building. And future Tracy says, 5 years from now, what do we want people to know us for? Not resume writing, not LinkedIn, not AI. And it says, answer the question, Dr. Tracy Shroyer is the leading expert in blank. And it says, finish that sentence. And then it goes through each of the individuals on the board and it asks a question. So Simon Sinek says, why do we exist? Adam says, what problem is becoming more important over the next decade? Brene says, what truth are other people afraid to say out loud? And it goes through all of these. Lewis says, if this becomes wildly successful, what impact does it have? How many people? How many organizations? How does your life look? Holly says, what business allows Tracy to have the life she wants? The only question Alex has is, what is one thing we sell first? Not 10, just one. Everything else is going to wait. So thinking about from that business perspective. So it goes through those individuals. And at the end, it gives me the homework. It says, finish this sentence. We exist to blank. In 10 years, people know me as blank. The biggest problem I solve is blank. The people I serve are blank. And it goes through, there's 10 questions here. And it says, what if more doesn't mean more work and more products? What if it means more coherence? And so I provide feedback. And one of the areas that I provided feedback are leading, expert, and career confidence. And what changes is that people are happier and more comfortable in their career and their life because they're able to make decisions, have a different perspective of their situation. The problem is definitely becoming more relevant because it's related to human skills and the uncertainty of AI. And so I go on to answer or comment on each of my board members and the questions that they raised or what they said. And it says, so I'll just share that high level with you. And it says, I think something that happened in this meeting is you stop talking about what you do and you start the focus of why do people need you. And it says, with the leading expert in career confidence. I like it, but I don't think it's quite big enough. So I love this that I have AI challenging me and pushing me. And I will tell you that I have let it. And then I've also gotten to the point where I'm like, shut up. This is what we need to do. This is what I want. I don't want to build another thing. I don't want to do, and I don't want to keep going. Sometimes I feel like I swirl with it. And this is basically saying confidence is an outcome, it's not a mechanism. And so it says, reading your answers, I heard these recurring themes, and it gives me a list of those. And confidence is what people gain because of your work. I wonder if you're actually becoming known for something like, and it gives me 5 different bullet points there, or maybe even, and it says, helping people make courageous, confident decisions about work in the age of AI. And it says that feels broader and gives you room to grow beyond job search services. And then it talks about with my purpose statement, what I wrote, what they heard, and they know me from other chats that we've had. And then also thinking through how I've answered a lot of these questions. Talks about what excited me most and your answer to the final question. And it says, here's what I imagine each advisor saying as a result of what you put in there. And then it says, before the next board meeting, I'd only ask you to answer one question, not 10, just one. And it says, what is the one belief about work that I hold, which, if more people believed it too, would fundamentally change how they build their careers and lead their lives? And it says, I don't want you to answer quickly. I want you to sit on that for a few days. And it says, I have a suspicion. And it gives me more information. And so the answer I gave is, what is the one belief about work that I hold, which, if more people believed it too, would fundamentally change how they build their careers and lead their lives? It's realizing that they have more agility and control than they think they do, and they are a smart person. And because there's so much doubt with individuals when they think about their careers and their them as a individual themselves. So then it comes back, we go back and forth, and it says, I want to challenge one word. Instead of career confidence, what if it is career agency? I hadn't thought of this before. Agency is the belief that I have choices, I can influence my future, I'm not trapped, I can learn, I can adapt, I can recover, I can decide. Confidence typically follows agency, but agency comes first. When people believe they have agency, they start taking action, and action builds that evidence, and evidence builds the confidence. And I know Lewis Howes has mentioned about having to take action before you start to have, I think it's the belief and probably the confidence too, is what he said. But you need the action to come first. And that can be so hard for us because we want that proof before we actually take that next step. Adam's question. Oh, okay. So Adam, when I said I need to bring in this dollar amount consistently, it says I smiled when I read that because Adam would probably ask, is that evidence that your philosophy is right or that your business model works? Because they're different hypotheses. The first one is people want and benefit from this way of thinking. The second is I found a repeatable way to deliver and monetize it. And I know when I read that, I rolled my eyes at first and I was like, damn you. And so I had to really think through that. And it gives me more like if I were Simon Sinek, and then one last. And I said, what are the first few steps I take from here, tangible, to set myself up for success? What are those tactical pieces I need to get moving? And this is interesting. It says, I think your board would actually stop you right there because I know your instinct. You'll go build your website, you'll create a course, you'll do a logo, start another workbook, build a bot, like whatever you think. And it says, I think every single person around that table would say, not yet. They would tell you to build that foundation first. And it says, if I were your chief of staff, here's the order I'd insist on. And it says, it gives it me phases. And it says, in the next 2 weeks, I would build your philosophy. Company constitution, not public, just for you. What do I believe at work? What do I believe about people? Like all of this becomes your operating system. And what's really fascinating is not long ago, I was working on something and it had me start to build my operating system and start with that foundation. And the interesting thing, and then it says phase 2 is build one framework, 3 is validate, 4 is reach your potential income that I talked about or the desired income. 5 is document everything. And then it talks about getting tactical. Like here's the projects, and it lays out 6 projects. And then I said, oh, so here's where I pushed back. I said, for the manifesto, for that operating system, I feel like we've hacked this one over and over. Can we just have it be a short document and think about what we've done in the past? And so it comes back and it gives me this draft, short and sweet. It's probably not even a page. I ended up pasting that into my notes on my phone so I could have that. I could read that over and see where do I want to tweak it? Where do I change it? Where does it not align? So I could start to let that sink in. And it talks about why I think this works because it doesn't talk about products. It doesn't talk about coaching, resumes, sales. It's a belief system. So almost like that's the start of the affirmation. And I know not everybody on my board would believe with that. Some might call it bullshit. So I said, okay, thank you for that. What do we work on next? Because I have that down. I'm going to look over that. I'm going to continue to do that. What's next? And it says instead of saying, what should you build? You should say, what's your first strategic asset? And so it starts to go into this intellectual property blueprint. And it says, here's the different levels. And it talks about a signature framework, core experiences, sporting tools, like almost building a house, which I've done this with another coach before, where we talked about what's the foundation, what's the roof, what are the pillars that align to that. It says, here's your homework for the week. It says, name your philosophy. And it says, you've already landed on this human centered career psychology, but don't worry about making it permanent. See if it still feels right after a few days. So I put that into my notes as well. So I'll continue to look at that. There was one that talked about human centered career psychology and one that talked about human centered career strategy. So I'm kind of toying over what does that look like, but I don't want to be too stuck on the name itself, right? But I want to make sure it feels right. And what does that make me feel as I'm reading those? Create one page called Ideas I Believe. It says every time you notice yourself saying, I believe X, write it down. Don't edit it, don't organize it, just collect them. And then also it says start an evidence vault. So every time you have a client, a student, a conversation, anything like that, when somebody says, I never thought about it that way, capture it and write it down. And then also writing a not yet list. So when you pop up ideas that you think about and you're like, I need to hold on to this one, I'm not yet ready, I need to keep focusing on this, write that down. And it says schedule your next board meeting, not with me, with yourself. So every month, spend 1 hour reviewing your business through the eyes of your advisory board. So the advisory board is not something that when you build it, it's every day you're going to come back and ask them for their feedback, their opinion. There was one piece in here, and maybe I'll get to it in the podcast, is where it talked about somebody asked a question, and I said, you know what? I think we need to have a separate conversation around that. So maybe I would come back one off and say, okay, I want to have a conversation with this board member about this and go more into that. So I could do that. But it's not something on a daily basis I'm going to get in here and do. Probably once I have that, some of those homework items done or start to flush those out, come back and give some feedback. I also added one person I did not put in there initially, which I want to make sure included, is Chrissy Connor, she was my visibility coach for over 4 years. She is the queen of visibility. And so I said, I want to make sure she's on my board. I don't know why I didn't have her in the beginning. So sorry, Chrissy, for that. So I had her for visibility and thought leadership. And she owns becoming known for your ideas, strategic visibility, personal brand positioning, media speaking opportunities, building authority without feeling performative, turning expertise into influence. The question she'd ask is, how will the people who need your ideas discover you? So where is that visibility? And the interesting thing is a lot of what Holly Marie Haynes talks about is the antisocial school, which I went through with her as a coach and talked about antisocial school and a lot of people not needing social media, definitely. And Chrissy talks about your visibility, and a lot of it is on social media, but there's definitely other opportunities that you can use that are not social media. So thinking about some of the things that those individuals would ask. And it says these are different questions that Chrissy's going to ask from Amy Porterfield. So Amy Porterfield's going to ask, how do we convert an audience into customers? And Chrissy's going to ask, how do we become the obvious expert before they ever need to buy anything? It says, I also noticed something interesting about your board. It's not made up of the biggest entrepreneurs or the biggest AI experts. It's a board that reflects the kind of company you're trying to build: research driven, human centered, intellectually rigorous, commercially viable, technology enabled, purpose driven. I think one of the things that I'll probably end up adding, I have Polly from some of the AI systems that she started to build. I'll probably end up adding somebody additional. And if you have any recommendations for individuals that you've listened to that I could listen to as well, or I might ask the question of my chat to say others who have built AI agents or used AI bots or things like that, that may be somebody that would be good. And I don't want the most famous person. I don't want somebody who's way too in the weeds of the technical, but somebody who can realistic and be that liaison for somebody who's building that or putting that together or telling them the right tools that they need to use. This is really interesting too. One of the things that I had done is, instead of what questions, I was very particular, and I'm going to be even more particular as I go forward, is what questions am I asking? It needs to be based on the quality of my thinking. What you put in is going to be quality of what you get out, right? It's not just going to design everything for you. And I gave you examples too of, as I'm building this and doing that first meeting with the board, how I've pushed back to. When it talked about building the operating system, I was like, we have beat this horse. Let's move on. The other thing that's really important is boundaries. So the board isn't running my life. It's not deciding my finances, replacing relationships, making ethical decisions, replacing professional experts. It's not making decisions for me. It's helping me to think better. It's an advisor, right? That's why I like, instead of board of directors, I like the advisory board. Humans decide. And that distinction really matters. So AI can give advice, but I am going to be the ultimate person to decide. I might get, hey, here's the pros and cons of making this decision. And if I decide the cons, that it's worth the risk to take, then I make the decisions. So, places that I'm going to use the board for my business is thinking about offers, maybe podcast strategy. I think things are going really well with how I have that laid out. Pricing, definitely. Frameworks, any kind of curriculum for things I have for the business, research, being able to dive in. And always, I recommend that if you're looking for support from a large language model, is that you're validating your sources. So if it is telling you, hey, go into these articles, that you're clicking and you're making sure those are real live articles and you can actually read the article and take information from there. It's not giving me a summary and I go from there and I run with it, that I'm actually looking into that original source. And from a personal perspective, recommendations and thoughts on career decisions. If I want to pick up different things within my business, if I want to change careers, like whatever that might look like, I would take some advice or some thoughts, not let it make a decision for me. Thinking about priorities to make sure that I am being, like I mentioned before, most efficient, most effective that I can be. Having any kind of difficult conversations, like can I role play those and get some support there? Being productive. One of the things that I have started to do since I built this advisory board is went in and I renewed my paid subscription for ClickUp because I wasn't doing very well with project management. And as I go back into the school semester and have my business and have my personal life, I want to make sure that I have that organized. One of the things I realized before with ClickUp, I did really well when I had one project with my career coaching clients, and I was able to keep track of all of those in there. Once I started to add more moving pieces, I struggled. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because I did not have a clear dashboard set up to help organize things. Another thing that has been really awesome with ClickUp is going into it calls it the brain. It's the AI piece. And I have so many free credits until I'd have to pay more each month to use it. But it's almost like it's an LLM AI within there. And what I've been able to do so far, I've used it I got some ideas from chat of how to organize everything. And then I went specifically into the teaching area and the prep for the fall. And I started to build out the tasks for the fall. And if you've ever taught, especially being a professor and teaching multiple classes, There's so many moving parts. And even if you've taught it many times over, you're still having to prep, you're still having to put things together, make sure you have copies, make sure you have things posted in your LMS, all of those different types of things. And so I was able to use the AI to help me to build out what are those tasks and also thinking about the due dates and how do we have it build out those. And then I was able to go in and validate those different things. And then I'm starting to build out that what that dashboard looks like. So I could say, okay, so for this week, here are the 5 to 10 things that are really important or that are to do in the next 7 days or something like that, and starting to build that out and starting to put the teaching piece in there. And I'm loving the AI aspect of it because it's helping to automate so much of that repetitive stuff that I would previously have to click on each task and do manually. So I'm really liking that, leaning towards actually purchasing that on a monthly basis. Need to see how long it takes me to set everything up before I dive into that. So I'm taking advantage of those free credits there, but that has been really helpful. Let me see some unexpected benefits. So when I put some notes together about the use of chat and putting together this advisory board, I trust AI less blindly. You have to be careful because you should not 100% trust everything that you're reading. Always validate whatever sources are, and you're taking things with a grain of salt, right? No, this is not Brene Brown. No, this is not Lewis Howes saying exactly. This is not Chris Connor saying this. Yes, their individual support, their coaching, their services give you a zillion times more what you need, and they're going to focus you in much better. And they are the ones helping to control what are those questions that they're asking, what are those things that they're realizing that you need, versus me asking questions or answering some questions to dive in a little bit more and a little bit more. They have a lot more structure in what they're building, and so totally understand that the value that they provide outside of this advisory board is a zillion times more than what they could provide in this board. They're giving me the strategic thoughts and supporting and advising in a focused area that I am helping to drive. So keeping that in mind, this is not the end all be all. There's so much more value in paying the money to those individuals with the minimal budget I'm in with my business. I can't afford that. So, how can I leverage this to help me get to that point so that I could in the future hire one of those individuals to be a coach, leverage one of their services a little bit more to help me focus in on maybe one of these 10 or 12 areas that I have them on my advisory board for. So, totally understand the value that they bring to the table. And that's not happening in this, it's happening on a much more general scale and one that's driven by me versus their knowledge and what they could really bring to the table. So I'm not discounting that at all in building this. And maybe I should have said that from the very beginning up front. My call to action for you is if you could build your own advisory board, who are some of the people that you would want in that room around that table? And think about why. We wouldn't want somebody in there just because they're a celebrity, right? What is their way of thinking? What perspective are they representing? I talked about different categories, and I didn't want too many people under any given category, right? I wanted them in there for a reason. What question would you ask them first? How would you kick off that conversation? What would be something that you want to talk about with that advisory board? Your advisory board doesn't have to be huge. You have to think about who are some of those core people that you have on it. And then, like I showed you even today, I remembered somebody else who is critical to it and added her in. So it's not like you can't add somebody later. We also want to be mindful of, are we adding people just to add people? Are we adding multiple people in the same category? If that's true, we need to figure out who is somebody that from those 2 or 3 people that we're going to add versus adding all of them. And when I went through and I asked for recommendations in an area, or I had chat actually recommend, hey, intellectual property is one you might want to look at. repository, documentation, knowledge management is one. And it gave me 2 or 3 people. I went and I did my research. I looked them up. I looked at what's their mindset, what is their way of thinking, how do they project themselves? Is that in alignment with me? Or is that challenging me? Which in some cases, I really want that, right? And in a lot of cases, you really want that to make you think. So making sure that you're using AI as a tool is really important. And I mentioned any of these board members can do coaching, offer services, and the products that they have at the prices that they do because of the value that they bring to the table. It's completely different, at a different scale than it is in this type of example. So I'm not saying to replace. And for me, I feel like a lot of this is temporary. It's to get me to build up that foundation so I can get to that point so that I could pay one or more of those coaches to continue to help me in those areas that I need and getting to prioritize what that is. So you're using it definitely, like Jeff Wood said in the Big Deal podcast, as a thought partner. Jeff also wrote a book called The AI Driven Leader. I downloaded it on Audible and I'm starting to listen to it now. Phenomenal. So, as a thought partner, helping you to brainstorm, to edit, to give you feedback, to be that devil's advocate and come back. Your advisory board give you a lot of different viewpoints from different perspectives. They'll give you constructive disagreement. So remember the example I gave you of Adam, not necessarily disagreeing, but saying, are you saying this because of this or this? Because those are different hypotheses. They're going to take you down different roads. It's going to help you with strategic decision making, challenging assumptions that you had. Let it challenge you. Let it get you into disagreement because that only strengthens your thought process and the direction that you want to go even more. And it helps you to become a better thinker. And Jeff Woods, again, he had mentioned about having AI interview you and ask you questions. And as I move forward, even thinking about with my board, I am going to leverage that even more. I didn't leverage that enough in this first one, but I hadn't even listened to that podcast episode, or I think I just barely listened to it, hadn't read more of his book when I started this process. So definitely having it ask me more questions. So it's getting what's my foundation? Where am I starting from? So it can begin to give me different viewpoints. I mentioned pulling somebody aside from the board to be able to go through and ask for more clarity, have them ask me questions, things like that, to get more support there. So definitely helping you to become a better thinker. It's not to automate my thinking at all. It's absolutely to elevate it to a higher level. So we still need the human in this, right? AI is supporting us and helping us and being that thought partner, like Jeff says, but it's not replacing my thinking at all. Thank you for listening, and I'm excited to catch you on the next episode.
Thanks again for listening to the Technically Human podcast. If you are navigating a career shift or you're just feeling like something needs to change, remember you do not have to figure it out alone. You can find tools, strategy, and support inside the Career Compass Pro or Career Compass membership. Learn more at www.careercompassusa.com. And if this episode helped you in any way, sharing it with someone else might help them too. I'll see you in the next episode.